Hey, like Tracy said, my name is William Smith. I am here to talk a little bit about John Gottman, who I'm not sure if you guys know who John Gottman is, but he is a fascinating person, and I think this is really interesting content. And so I'm going to try to link, I've made a little slideshow for this. And I was asking Tracy before we got started, can you guys see that, first of all?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, great. Okay, so I was asking Tracy, what's the content of the people that are showing up today? So are we talking to lawyers? Are we talking to accountants? Like, who are we talking to? And she said it would be a grab bag of kind of everybody. So if there's therapists in this call, this may be a little bit more of a review than anything else. I was telling Tracy, I kind of designed the slideshow in mind with the idea if somebody approaches you and says, I'm seriously considering divorce. And, some people may do that prematurely. Some people may be way overdue for it, things like that. And so John Gottman and I'm going to talk obviously in depth about this, but he's a research psychologist who studied marriages for a very long time. Uh, he is a conscientious observer. I'll go ahead and say that. So keep that in mind as we go through this. John Gottman didn't really care if couples stayed together or not. I mean, he just watched them. Like somebody would honestly go and like study animals or something like that. He took almost kind of a similar approach and just kind of watched married couples over a long period of time and recorded his findings. So this is really interesting content. This is one of my favorite subjects to do. Um, so we'll go ahead and jump in. So here's just a little bit about me, as Tracy said. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Have been a marriage and family therapist in Atlanta since 2012. Do a lot of stuff that has dovetails with family law. So we do child custody evaluations, parent coordination, co-parenting counseling. We talk with people before, during, and after the divorce process. So if people are wanting counseling, like mental health counseling or just whatever kind of counseling, we can talk to them and kind of flesh out, is this something that you really want to do? We incorporate the things that are in the slideshow into how we talk to clients and how we kind of assess, is this something that you guys really want to move forward with? Is there any hope of your relationship staying together? If there is any hope of your relationship staying together, do you guys want to try that? Where are you in that process? So that's what I do, kind of day in and day out, is any number of these things, almost depending on the day. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll jump in. All right, so John and Julie Gottman, these people are probably some of the most famous living psychologists in the world. So here we have John Gottman. He is the one who started this whole thing. His wife, Julie, was actually not his wife in the beginning. She joined him later on. And so we'll talk about each of them individually just because they really are interesting people. Okay, so John Gottman. John Gottman was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. John Gottman is closer to a scientist, really, than he is a psychologist. I mean, don't get me wrong, he is a psychologist, but he loves numbers. Specifically, he loves numbers. He has a master's degree in psychological mathematics from MIT. He basically likes to make patterns and things like that. And that's what this whole thing is about. So he came in and he just said that he wanted to basically objectively try to identify behaviors in marriages, and a lot of which lead to divorce. Or on the other hand, he says that there is a concept called a healthy long-term relationship. And so he also studied that. So basically, his whole model is mostly focused on behavior. So he claims, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, that he has objectively figured out what behaviors will lead to a divorce and what behaviors are actually pretty healthy and indicative of a long-term relationship. John Gottman himself has been married 3 times. So I thought that was an interesting piece of trivia. So Julie, who he's been married to for a while, is obviously the third one. But he himself has been through divorce and has had failed relationships. So I thought that was interesting. So like we talked about, he is a research psychologist. He is not a therapist. He studies, he does research psychology. He studies people, basically. And he currently lives in Seattle, Seattle, Washington, which is where a lot of this stuff took place at the University of Washington in Seattle, which is actually also my alma mater. All right, so his wife, Dr. Julie Gottman, is a clinical psychologist, a therapist, and a respected author and researcher in her own right. She is considered the co-creator of the Gottman Marriage Therapy, the Gottman Institute. In presentations, Julie Gottman is the one who tends to be the one who takes the data that John Gottman collected and translates it into therapy. So how can you apply this in therapy? So they're a team. I mean, they really are a team. All right. And this is the part where it's interesting, I think. So the research, how they collected this data. All right, so John Gottman began studying marriages in the 1970s. He was kind of this math whiz, and he realized somewhere along the lines, he was interested in math and he was interested in psychology, and he realized that people were not studying marriages somewhere in the 1970s. And he talks in some of his videos about how some marriage therapists, I mean, it was basically the Wild West. Like, nobody knew really what they were doing. It was just trying stuff and trying to see what worked. There was no real kind of structure to it. Nobody was really doing a nice job of collecting this information. And he talks about how, he was aware of one marriage therapist that would give both, the husband and the wife a foam baseball bat and basically tell them to have at it for a while. And so it was all sorts of crazy stuff. And so he sat down, he said, listen, I'm going to really study marriages. And so he started this in the 1970s. So the way that he collected the information, one of the things, and it's listed in this, is called what he called the Love Lab. Okay. So the Love Lab is an apartment in Seattle, Washington, on the University of Washington campus. It's an apartment that is completely rigged with two-way mirrors and cameras. Okay. So, and on the other side of these cameras, they had teams of people watching them. And so they had a few rules. They wouldn't follow them into the bedroom. They wouldn't follow them into the bathroom. But the general idea was that if you were in the apartment, it was fair game. So they would just watch how people interacted. And so these people, they would have volunteer couples who would check themselves into this place for about a week. Okay. And they would just watch. And again, they weren't intervening. They were just watching. They would also talk about clients. They would have clients come into a room, into an office sometimes, and they would tell them that they wanted to watch them talk about a problem, but they would, before they started talking about a problem, they would hook them up to all these machines. They would hook them up to blood pressure monitors, heart pulse machines. They would check your blood oxygen levels. After the discussion, they would actually draw blood, and they would this is also kind of interesting. They would draw blood and they would have it tested for cortisol. Right, so cortisol is the stress hormone, right, and adrenaline may have been in there too. And so they would show they would take the lab findings of the cortisol and adrenaline levels in the blood and show it to doctors, physicians, and also show them the tapes that they recorded, because they would videotape these. And the doctors could successfully identify the amounts of stress and cortisol with the independent conversations. So all sorts of stuff is happening. So, and actually this picture right here, this is basically what they did, right? So if you guys will see, they were measuring biomarkers the entire time that these people were talking about conversations. And again, John Gottman loved numbers, so he wanted that data for sure. Another thing that's kind of interesting about the Gottmans is that they followed volunteer couples for decades, which is hard to do. That's a formidable task, and people move. It's just it takes a little bit of muscle to follow all the people that they did for as long as they did. But they followed couples for decades, and they were predicting, which all the while they were predicting, would this end in divorce, and if it's going to end up, they actually could basically figure out, will it be soon, will be in the, somewhere down the line, or are these people going to go basically until the end? So that's interesting. And this is one of the things that I thought would resonate well with you guys. He claims that he can successfully predict within 3 minutes of a conversation which couples are going to stay married and which couples are going to end in divorce. At the same time, he has also said that he has identified what is objectively healthy marriage behavior, and some of that is a little surprising. so maybe it's not so much as some behavior in marriages is maybe we want to describe it as healthy, but it may not be as unhealthy as other things. So we'll talk about that as well. All right, so this is a very brief overview of how we as a therapist would conceptualize a client coming in. So before a client even comes in, they complete an assessment, and it's a very thorough assessment, and it basically studies how do they think about their partner and how do they feel the relationship is going. And so you can tell, I mean, it's a fairly thick packet, and by the time they get through with it, it will tell you, like, it actually, it's through the Gottman Institute website, and they will actually do the statistics for you about, like, is this a couple that is, in trouble, like really serious trouble, or is this somebody who, you maybe have some hope, or these guys are actually in pretty good shape. So the assessment does a lot of work for you, which is really healthy or helpful. So the way that it works, if somebody wants to do marriage therapy with this model, they would come in. The 2-1-1-2 format is that we meet together as a couple the first time. Then we meet in an individual appointment separately. So they're by themselves. And so they come in and we ask them, how do you feel like this relationship is going? How do you feel, about the idea of staying together? We also assess for safety, so domestic violence, things like that. And just for the record, domestic violence is actually contraindicated. If you guys didn't know that, for marriage therapy, you're not supposed to do marriage therapy with domestic violence clients. Perpetrators of domestic violence do not like that to be known. It can be a pretty dangerous situation. So we would cancel in the event of domestic violence. We would pull the plug on marriage therapy. Anyway, they come in together, they come in individually, they come back together permanently. And the idea is that you don't want to get the perception of what's called triangulation, which is basically an alliance. So if people meet independently of each other, sometimes they get paranoid that there's like a team kind of building, and they don't like that. So once they come back for their feedback appointment, they are always together. They will be together forever. So you don't meet with them independently anymore after the second appointment. So the Gottmans have this thing called the sound relationship house, and that's a big part of what they talk about. Well, this didn't translate very well on the slideshow, but I think you can still read it. So basically, they take the idea of a house, with a house being the foundation of the house being the most important and kind of moving up. So what he talks about, this idea of love maps, which is kind of a corny, like, psychotherapy word, but love maps means, do you understand what's happening in your partner's life at any given period of time? Close couples will usually have that. Like, close couples will understand when their partners are stressed or upset or depressed or whatever. They understand or excited. They understand what's happening in the other person's life. Shared fondness and admiration, again, is a reference to how do these people kind of think about themselves, and do they have fun together, things like that, which is an important question. A lot of couples don't have fun together, which is sad. Turning towards is the idea, like, if somebody were to if my wife were to walk into this room right now, would I look at her? Would I acknowledge her? If she asked me to do something, would I listen to it, give some sort of feedback about it? That is one of the behaviors that they say is extremely healthy in relationships, is just simply stopping what you're doing for a minute and looking at if somebody says something to you, and stopping what you're doing and looking at them and talking to them about whatever. I mean, it may even be something as simple as like a grunt or something like that. But what they will call turning towards is, are you basically paying attention to even little things? And little things, since we hit on that, is extremely important. What they would call, like, these micro interactions are extremely important in relationships. And I put some of these at the end of the show, but there's some little sayings that go with marriage therapy, and small things matter. And that's one of the things that you'll hear constantly in marriage therapy. Small things matter. So, like, if your wife is, I don't know, doing the dishes when you get home, and you come and give her a hug right then and there. I mean, just little things like that, but a lot of them. Small things make a big difference, and that's one of the things that you'll hear a lot in marriage therapy. Positive perspective. Do they have a generally good idea that their relationship is in a good place. And if couples that tend to describe their marriage in positive terms tend to be in a good place. All right, obviously. So if you get the sense that people are kind of neutral to positive about the way that they're describing their relationship, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and we'll talk more about that. Well, neutral is not necessarily bad. Positive is obviously good. Managing conflict. This is really important. So managing conflict basically has a lot to do with how long can people talk before they start to get too upset. So there are certain types of topics that people can get very upset with. So there's a saying in psychology that says that your emotional brain can take over everything. Sometimes they'll call that emotional hijacking. Some people cannot talk about things for too long before they really become almost hysterical sometimes. I mean, some people can become very upset very quickly if they feel like they're, in some kind of trouble or whatever. So the ability to help clients like learn how to regulate their own self or themselves, how to talk about a problem, and accepting influence, which is basically your ability, like if your partner says that they want you or don't want you to do something, if you do it, that would be considered accepting influence. Um, Life dreams come true and creating shared meaning. Those are along the lines of like, listen, we're going to raise a great family. We're going to buy a beach house. We're going to, retire in our 60s. And you guys are both on board with that and mutually working towards that. That is a very, very healthy behavior in relationships. So that's kind of how they assess some of the ways where people come in. So let's talk about what are the biggest indicators of divorce. All right. So do you guys know what the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are in the Bible? Anybody know the 4? Pop quiz. All right. In the Bible, it's war, famine, pestilence, and death in the book of Revelations, which is the end of times, right? So John Gottman uses that expression here, and he says that there are 4 things that if they are present in a relationship are very serious, a very big problem, that are the biggest indicators of divorce. So those 4 things are criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. Okay, and so a lot of these are kind of straightforward, but I'll expand on some. So criticism and defensiveness tend to be cycles. So somebody will criticize and the other person will defend, and those two tend to be kind of linked together. Both of these are not healthy behavior. And if these, I mean, John Gottman himself would be the first to say that probably all of these things are present at some point or another in a relationship. So it's really when they don't go away, like when these things are present for a period of time and they get worse and they get more deeply rooted, that's where it gets to be a big problem, potentially a really big problem. So criticism and defensiveness tend to go together. Stonewalling actually tends to be more of a male problem, not always, but stonewalling is when somebody, again, becomes flooded to the point where they cannot talk or respond, right? So, you might see people that are real closed off and just refuse to talk. You may have people that become, again, like upset, but stonewalling is basically where somebody becomes so flooded with an emotion that they are unable or unwilling to talk about an issue. And then contempt is considered the most serious of the 4. Okay, so if somebody comes in and they've been basically holding each other in contempt for a long time, that's a very serious problem. So contempt includes character attacks. So the idea with character attacks is that the problem isn't the problem, the person is a problem. So if somebody is like spending money like crazy, that person is not looking at the behavior so much as they're looking at this person has something that's pathologically wrong with them, and I'm not okay with this, and I'm getting more and more upset with this. And so if that idea becomes deeply rooted, where it basically becomes almost impossible to separate the person from the problem, and they're just so upset with this person, and it may be a few things, like they may not like the way that, like I said, they may not like the way that they spend money, they may not like the way that they talk to women. They may not like the way that they, it could be anything, clean up the house. I mean, but the idea is that like there's something that is deeply rooted. And then the next word is resentment, right? That they come to resent. So resentment is really the biggest problem in relationships. So people will tell you that it's things like sex or money or something like that, which there's probably some truth in that, but I think it falls under the bigger umbrella of resentment. So if people come, and you'll see it, I mean, I guess I don't need to tell y'all that people are very, very angry with the other person. And so if that is present, it is very difficult to get away from it. So contempt is considered the most serious of the four horsemen. And so let's see if this works. So this is from the Gottman's website themselves. So they also have what they call antidotes to the four horsemen. So the antidote for criticism is considered a gentle startup, right? So a gentle startup is considered with a soft tone of voice. It is designed to basically avoid like this ambushing perspective. Like it says here, they'll use I statements, and a lot of times they will explicitly express what they want.
Will, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your screen share is still on the slideshow.
Oh,
it looked like maybe you intended us to see that.
Yeah, hang on. Thank you for letting me know. All right, let me try this. All right, is that, can you guys see that?
Yep.
The four horsemen.
Yeah, we can see it now, Will.
Okay. All right, so this is from their website. And so I'll just give you guys a second to look at this, and I'll kind of talk about it. So like I just said, criticism, the antidote is considered soft, what they call gentle startups or soft startups. So talking in a soft tone of voice, not starting the sentence with the word you, which is basically almost a surefire way to get people to become defensive quickly. So they a lot of times they'll switch it to the word I. A lot of times they will give some sort of concrete thing that they need. We'll jump down to defensiveness since I said they were linked. So it says that the antidote to defensiveness is taking responsibility. So those are very, very behavior. That's very, very healthy behavior. That's much more healthy behavior than getting stuck in these cycles. So, and that's a big part of what we do as well, is if they get stuck, we talk about like, well, how do you get unstuck? So we do that in therapy. Stonewalling, like we talked about, the idea is self-soothing. So there are tricks that people can do basically to help themselves regulate themselves. Deep breathing, for example, is always probably one of the biggest go-tos. So the ability to deep breathing your whole body will relax. It puts more oxygen in your bloodstream. Your heart rate will slow down. Your thoughts will start to slow down. Your whole body will relax. If you do it, and it's not the kind of thing where you can count to 10 and take 10 deep breaths and you're done. It's probably about 5 minutes at least of really deep breathing. Cold water is good. A lot of people will say splash some cold water on your face, or take a cold, like a damp towel and kind of wrap it or put it on your face, your neck, sometimes your wrists. So stonewalling deals a lot with like your ability to calm yourself down to have a conversation. And a lot of clients, it takes a lot of practice to get them to a point where they can talk about a hard thing. And so we'll tell our clients that you may only be, in the beginning, you may only be able to talk for about 2 or 3 minutes at a time before you are so upset that you just can't anymore. And also, as a rule of thumb, emotional people cannot have conversations. It just does not work. Okay, so two emotional people talking about something can really spiral into something that's just out of control. So it's highly discouraged for two emotional people to talk about like an emotional topic. And then contempt, right? Like we said, contempt is the most serious. So it says, build a culture of appreciation. So that's like the idea of like trying to catch your partner doing something right. That is, trying to reframe things about your partner to be more positive constantly. That may include things like the benefit of the doubt. But the idea behind contempt is to basically try to flip the script and have the people try to view things in at least not a negative way, right? So neutral or positive, which can be hard. And again, that's why contempt is so hard, or it's so challenging to deal with, because sometimes the people can be so far gone, there's just no coming back. And so when John Gottman says that he can tell within 3 minutes if these people are going to get divorced or not, he's basing that on contempt. Like, how do they talk to each other? How are they describing the relationship? Do they consider it to be somebody who has a deeply rooted character flaw? Is it something that they consider to be pathological, or that they have just grown to absolutely resent? And so if that is present, and you can get a sense of like, is that present? That's a big problem. That's what he based that 94% number on. All right. So one more time, if y'all want to see that. All right, healthy behaviors. These things are considered healthy. So in marriage therapy, one of the first things that we do is depending on what's going on, we stabilization, like in any area of healthcare, really is the first step. So there's an expression called the 3 A's, which stands for affairs, addiction, abuse. So if that's present, we got to get rid of them. So and that may include individual therapy before couples therapy. So affairs, addiction, abuse, they will say that needs to be the first order of business. Other things that can really destabilize relationships, financial problems, legal problems, things like that. So if there's a lot of chaos around a certain subject, you would try to stabilize that. Like we said, it's the small things. A lot of small things all the time is very healthy in relationships. Also, this idea of what they will call pile on the positives, which are positive experiences, positive language, positive perspective, things like that. That's healthy for anything, but especially the way that you perceive a relationship. Love maps, again, which is that's his way of saying, like, do you understand what's happening in your partner's life? Do you intimately know your partner's inner workings? That would fall under the umbrella of love maps. Soft starts are very healthy in relationships. So again, the soft start is basically starting with a soft tone of voice. Well, there's actually 3 components to it. It's starting with a soft tone of voice, asking permission to talk about a problem, and asking about timing if you need to. So it's like, is this a good time to talk about this? If not now, when is a good time to talk about this? Willingness is the counterpart to soft start. So like, you can't just punt it, kick the can down the road, and then not come back to that conversation. So willingness. So like, if you say, listen, I want to talk to you after dinner tonight about this issue. Willingness is that person's ability, the other partner's ability to come in and actually have that conversation. So that conversation has to happen. So that's very healthy. So, and according to his data, women are usually the ones who need to focus on soft starts, and men are usually the ones who need to focus on willingness. Again, that's not all the time, but that's apparently what he found. The 5 to 1 rule: 5 positive experiences to every 1 negative experience, and also even when you're having like conflict, that you're more focusing on positive things than negative things. All right, and this is an interesting. I always like this question. Does anybody want to guess what the #1 predictor of a healthy long-term relationship is? Any guesses?
You're right, honey.
That's probably under the same. Yes, that's not what he calls it, but that's in the right direction. All right, the #1 predictor of a healthy long-term relationship, according to John Gottman's research, is accepting influence. The ability. So again, accepting influence is like if somebody tells you what, if you're talking about things, and like, so for example, if I were to go to my wife and say, like, listen, I'm thinking about dropping out of my job and I'm going to go to clown college and I'm going to become a clown and join circus, and I think I'd like that. And she says, well, I think that's a bad idea. And then I say, okay, well, maybe you're right. I guess I won't do that right now. That is accepting influence, right? If your wife comes to you and she says, listen, I think you're too stressed out from work. I really think you need to reel it back. And I think we need to, put the focus on our family for a while. And you do that, that is considered accepting influence. Also, being a positive influence on your partner, right? So encouraging them, supporting them, things like that. And your partner, ideally get it going along with it. That is what he says is the #1 predictor of a healthy long-term relationship. Surprising findings. Conflict, including high conflict, may not be the worst thing in the world. So they took a kind of a bet about which model of conflict would be the most present in relationships and healthy long-term relationships. And so they had this idea of people that like avoid conflict, this idea of like kind of the Goldilocks area where people can handle some conflict, but they don't like too much conflict. And then they had couples that are constantly in high conflict. And they were trying to see if one of these, so again, like avoidance, some conflict but not too much, or high conflict, they were trying to guess which one would be, present and healthy, like, after a few decades of marriage, which one of these conflict styles is going to show up the most. And actually all three of them were equally represented. So high conflict is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. So I don't like stereotypes, but there is a stereotype of these like kind of loud Italian families or something like that, where there's a lot of yelling and a lot of maybe like kind of name calling or things like that. But it's also kind of who they are, right? And so if it kind of fits with who they are or whatever, it may not be the worst thing in the world. What he says is a problem is fighting about fighting. That's a problem. So like if you're fighting about, you were supposed to go to the grocery store and you didn't do it, and now we're kind of stuck tonight, and you're maybe even yelling at each other, but it's more or less kind of a constructive conversation at the same time. It's not the worst thing in the world. If it starts going to things like character attacks and kind of this like demoralizing or belittling kind of place, and you start fighting about how the other person's got something wrong with them, that's bad. That is bad. But just the idea of like yelling or conflict is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. All right, this is also interesting. Couples that are in a toxic relationship for an extended period of time, basically it does the same thing to your brain as it would with a soldier on deployment in Afghanistan. All right, so this idea of being your brain doesn't discriminate. Okay, it's all relative. So if they were to take an MRI of a couple who's in a toxic relationship and then also take an MRI of like a guy who's been on patrol in Afghanistan, the brain would basically be doing the same thing. So like people that are constantly feeling like they're going to be attacked and are constantly feeling like they're going to need to defend themselves, like their bodies are constantly producing cortisol. Cortisol is a really unhealthy hormone. It's linked to things like weight gain, cancer, all sorts of things. It's bad for your blood pressure. It's bad for your heart. It's bad for everything, right? So if they were to look at your like I said, like a brain scan of somebody who's been in a toxic relationship for a long time, it would be very difficult to distinguish that from somebody who's like I said, like an active soldier, which is interesting. All right, so in a nutshell, 4 horsemen are the largest predictors of divorce, with contempt as the top one. When you're assessing for the 4 horsemen, you also want to account for severity and duration, because again, a lot of these are probably in and out of most relationships, but if it's been around for a long time, that can be a big problem, or if it's a very intense problem. The more clients talk about divorce, the more likely they are to get divorced. All right, and that's that has links with other areas of psychology. So unfortunately, like suicide, the more that they talk about it, the more likely it is to happen. So if somebody is talking about divorce a lot, that's not a great sign. Assessing the language of if somebody's talking to you about their relationship and they're using very almost kind of hopeless kind of language, that's a big problem. If somebody is saying like, listen, I don't know, we have good days, we have bad days, something like that. Like we've had more bad days than good days lately. It feels like we're never going to get out of this, something like that. Or if it's kind of impulsive, those maybe things that you want to keep in consideration. Oops. Don't mind that other one. For marriage therapy to work, these are the things that we basically assess for. How good are clients at understanding problems? How committed are they to improving a situation? And how good are they at changing things? So these people down here at the bottom, these are good indicators. So if people can understand that there is a problem, which a lot of people will live in denial basically for a long time, If people are good at admitting that there is a problem and understanding what's causing the problems, that's a very good sign. If people say that they are committed to improving a relationship and you believe them and you feel like they will do the work, that's a good sign. If you have people that you feel like are good at changing things, like really putting a good faith effort into changing things, that's a good sign. So a couple of things to keep in mind. All right, so I don't know if you guys can see me or not, but I have his book and I'll show you at the end. The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work is basically the Bible of marriage therapy. It is a great book. It's like a New York Times bestseller. It's not like a textbook or something. It's funny. He co-wrote it with a professional author, I think, but it's easy to read. They do a really nice job of taking a complicated topic and making it really, almost kind of fun to read. It's like I said, John Gottman's got a good sense of humor. It's a good book. And if you're dealing, I mean, it's an interesting book anyway, but especially if you're dealing with people that are in relationship problems, it's a really good book. This is one that Julie Gottman wrote, The Art and Science of Love. And their website, which is just www.gottman.com, has a wealth of resources. So you can go to his website and you can take a look around. He has all of his, they have all sorts of stuff, books, handouts, the assessment that I was referring to, all of the stuff is on his website. So I would certainly encourage you guys to at least, take a look at that and maybe get a good working knowledge of what's in there. And that is basically it. Any questions?
Thank you, Will. That was really interesting. I know a lot of us are in the business of dissolved marriages, but it's certainly good to hear about all the different factors. I know over the years, all of us have probably been involved with people who you thought, well, could this marriage be saved? Do I really want, it kind of makes you feel bad. Do I really want to be a part of dissolving this marriage, that could be saved? Is there something that could help out here? So that's really interesting information. Does anybody have any questions for Will? You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask those questions if you'd like.
Hey, Will, what is a level 3 therapist?
So level 3 therapist, so I still have a little bit of work to do. So there's about 5 levels to get to the actual end of the line. I've been a level 3 therapist for a few years. So when you get, there's just more to it. And when you get to being a full Gottman certified therapist, they're pretty expensive to begin with. It's really expensive to see a Gottman certified therapist. And they also are able to certify other therapists. So that's really the advantage of getting to the top of it. But a level 3 is most of the vast majority of the content.
Gotcha. Very good. Anything else?
I do. Will, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very informative. I'm also a therapist and I've been trained in Gottman, and I always like to see other therapists doing the same work. Are you accepting new clients? Do you take insurance? Are you open on taking any new couples? Are you doing in person or virtual?
Yeah, so we are taking new clients for marriage therapy. We are doing it in person. So we started a new office in Marietta recently. So that's where I am most of the time now. I also supervise a group where they do take health insurance. We don't take health insurance at the new group, but I supervise therapists who do take health insurance that I personally supervise. So either I can see them if they're willing to do it without, so our rate is like $185 for a 60-minute appointment. But if they can't do that and they want to use their health insurance, we have therapists that I supervise that will work with their health insurance.
All very good questions. We get asked those all the time when we're referring people. So Stephanie knows the questions that we get asked all the time. So that was good. Thank you. Yeah. So I want to thank Will certainly for doing that presentation today. That's just the kind of content that we like to put out to our members that I hope educates you guys and gives you another level of knowledge about the divorce and how to best serve our clients. And so anybody who wants to stay on for a few minutes just to chat with one another and network, or if you have questions for Will you didn't want to ask on the video, please stay on. Otherwise, that is it for our meeting today. I would just say to our members, please check your email for our most recent newsletter so that you're getting the most up-to-date information from us. It comes from Constant Contact, but the email that you want to make sure is not going to your junk is amicableddivorcenetwork@gmail.com. Thank you very much, Will. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys. Have a great day and a great week. I'll hang out for a little while.